we do have one lecture on developing such expertise in this training also. Collection of analysis of large-scale macroeconomic data such as productivity, investment, subsidies, wages, unemployment, time series panel, and simultaneous equation models. He has knowledge of the softwares R, GAMS, and Stata, and he is a PhD from IRI and MSc from TNAU Coimbatore, and BSc was from an agriculture college in Madurai. He is very young and he has handled multiple projects by this time, including a network project on structural transformation, regional disparity and institutional reforms in agriculture, having partners from IRI as well as JNU, prestigious universities. So with these words, I would like to invite Dr. Balaji for his lecture in this winter school, which has started from 5th February. So Dr. Balaji.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, screen sharing, it says it is disabled.
Okay, Chauhanji, please enable the screen sharing. Screen sharing, Chauhanji.
नहीं कर रहा हूँ
Okay.
कर रहा हूँ
Share, you enable it for everyone.
enable ही कर दूँगा
Make me co-host.
एक मिनट मैडम को-होस्ट ही है
नहीं, मैं co-host नहीं हूँ अभी ना.
आप नहीं हो एक सेकंड कंप्यूटर नहीं चल रहा कंप्यूटर हैंग हो गया मैडम मेरा
दिलीप कैन
कंप्यूटर हैंग हो गया एक्चुअली ना
होस्ट नहीं बनाया ना किसी को
होस्ट तो है दिलीप होस्ट है नहीं एक मिनट
कोई होस्ट नहीं है इसमें
नाउ यू कैन सर बालाजी सर
हाँ यस okay my screen is visible for you
it is getting visible
starting
I saw yeah
yes it is visible now
okay thank you very much ma'am and the organizing committee for this opportunity and dear participants good morning everyone the present lecture is not exactly a teaching on some methodologies or data extraction procedure straight away it's not teaching anything but the major idea here is to share the institute's experience in the network project like Dr. Rajni ma'am was sharing with you. We had a network project on structural transformation. I was part of the management plus research participant. We had some 6 other partners. Here in this presentation, the idea is to share our research results, both in terms of methodological framework as well as the policy or conceptual frameworks that explains what has been happening in Indian agriculture, how it is changing from one stage to the other at a macro level and then sub-regional level and sometimes in the district level, and in which aspects they are changing, why it is changing. That is the major idea of the presentation. So here what you will be getting is like you will see what is the issues at present and why it is happening, and then from your research point of view or from your institute's mandate point of view, you can able to choose some research gaps or research ideas plus some methodological approaches then you can try to implement it. Anyway, based on the coverage of the presentation is like that, for everyone, there will be some points which they can proceed for their own states or districts or for their research programs. So here, the basic just to start between the transformation is to compare what is growth and what is transformation. Many a times growth is typically a numerical improvement. Say here now we see 3.9% growth in agriculture comparing with last year, and before that it was 3.6. Sometime whenever there is a drought, we see sort of 1%, 2%, and rarely we see a negative growth as well. The growth is just a GDP from one point to another point of time, how it is changing. Our growth in investment, you can say again last year how much it was and now how it is. So whether how it is moving, that one. When it comes to transformation, its horizon is very broad. Growth becomes a small part of it, to be more frank. So transformation, when we try to say transformation, we can try to put it into some pictures. Transformation in terms of output, like how much agriculture sector is producing from the farmer's point of view, or from the consumer's point of view, how far the commodity is coming to the market, what's their quality standards, or what is their differences or varieties in that sense. And when it goes to the general economy, we can say in terms of employment, what has been happening, whether all farmers are really doing only farming, from where they are getting additional sources of income. That way we can try to understand transformation within agriculture. And from the business point of view, now in recent times, there are a lot of attention has been given to commercialize agriculture. In the doubling farmers income report, in the recommendation, we can see the very major recommendation is like stop looking agriculture just as a supplying agent. You try to see that as a profit-making business. And then we have seen a lot of efforts like farming FPOs, farming startups, and now recently in drone, in the budget document, you might have heard there are a lot of scope or importance given for using drone in agriculture, use of AI and ML for forecasting. The horizon is totally changing. So when it comes to transformation, we see everything together and we see how agriculture was earlier and in future how it is going to be. So the very idea to explain the transformation is like to see from two perspectives. One is you see output, and second you see employment. And within output, we see agriculture as a whole with respect to the total country. From theoretical point of view, the identification in most of the countries, or we can say almost entire countries in the world, they follow some pattern. So initially, agriculture will be contributing to the most when it comes to their GDP. And gradually, this will be declining when the industrial sector picks up. We know the industrial revolution in Britain and then US, and it proceeds from one country to the other. So what happens is some labor from agriculture, they will shift, or some new people who are joining in the labor force, they will be entering into the industries. So the output and employment composition, we can say the share of labor who were earlier in agriculture, they will be gradually shifting into the manufacturing for certain level. So this will be keep proceeding. Once it is attaining certain level, then the service sector will pick up. So the service sector will start rising, but labor from both agriculture as well as the manufacturing, they will be shifting towards other service sectors. So automatically the manufacturing sector gets a hump-shaped curve and the service sector starts picking up well. This is the traditional pattern observed in most of the countries. I have shared some materials with you. The organizers will be sharing with you. There are a lot of evidences and discussions on how it has happened in India. India, again, this has been atypical. India has not followed the track. We'll see here at the first panel at the left, there is a change in share of agriculture with respect to manufacturing and industries in terms of GVA. In the middle panel, we see how far employment is changing in agriculture with respect to the other countries. And third is one consequence of it. We saw manufacturing will progress for some time and then it will decline. Then service sector will pick up. But initially, service sector share will be less than the share of manufacturing. This has never been the case in agriculture in India, both in terms of GVA and employment. Or within the GVA or GDP, the manufacturing sector is supposed to get a peak and then a drop, and that has also never been happened. So in international literature, many a times when they try to explain India's growth or development, they will say this is sort of a black box or a sort of mystery. Like India, before reaching a level of industrialization, it started focusing more on service sector and started earning more from the service sector. Even now, we can see a lot of our attention is on service sector. See, the manufacturing sector's employment uptake is also small, but in service sector, we see all these AI or ML or the other digital India or digital transformation, everything is related to service sector most of the time. We have a policy on industry 4.0, but that is still depends mostly on the efforts from the service sector. So India's growth strategy has mostly been come from the service sector. From agriculture, the major source of supply has been from the agriculture in one time. And when country proceeds, a new labor force or a much educated labor force, whoever joins the labor market, they straight away went into the service sector instead of going for a manufacturing at the earlier stages and then moving into the service sector. So because of this, what has happened is the productivity has been very different in agriculture when it comes to the other sector. The implication is like whenever a labor is more productive in the services, you can think of any IT industry or banking or insurance, the productivity in agriculture is very less. And these transmit into their income earnings. Higher is the productivity, higher is the income he is going to earn. So this income inequality has also increased along with this transition. So these are based on the statistics available from the CSO. We try to see how far in different states in terms of GVA, the share of agriculture, industries and services, they are changing over different states. We haven't explored why this is following some pattern in one state, but it's not in the other state. But our preliminary idea is to see how far the difference is. For instance, here in Jammu Kashmir, we'll see the pattern is very clear. The manufacturing went for some time till 90s. After that, after the LPG policies, the share of manufacturing declined typically, as we observed earlier. But there are a lot of states we will see, say Himachal Pradesh itself. That's also a hilly state. Here, what we see is manufacturing is still growing, and manufacturing sector's output is higher than the service sector's output. There are a lot of differences. What do we see in general in terms of output is, if you try to see around 18 or 17 major states, in one third of the state, the output in manufacturing, which is supposed to attain some peak and then supposed to follow a decline, that has not been followed. They are still increasing. This is a sort of premature phasing of this transformation. And these data series are from 1961 to 2016, as mentioned in the caption, and they are smooth and a sort of local weightage has been given to have a clear picture of it. And when we try to see how far the employment structures are changing, we can't straight away compare the change, what has been in output and what has been in employment. For instance, what we saw in Jammu Kashmir, the sort of transformation was very clear as per the theory. But when it comes to employment, the structure is very different. In employment, again, manufacturing was supposed to be higher in the initial phases, but service sector has been very high. So the takeaway is the experience of India or the Indian states has been very different when comparing with the world. In manufacturing, when it comes to employment, in most of the states, there has not been a peak. So this, in recent, how it is linked to the present structure is like in recent times, we talk a lot about unemployment, or the ability to generate new employment is getting decreased day by day. But here we also see manufacturing is having a limited absorption of labor. And also in the latest NSS survey estimates, we see a lot of farmers are earning only around 50% of income from farming, which means half of their occupation is like they are going to construction sector or MNREGA related works. So in future, the employment generation is going to be a very difficult task, even if we are going to have a better growth structure. And that the earlier discussion is for national level. And here, even within agriculture, we see some sort of changes when we try to see after the independence. The panel at the left says in absolute number what has been the changes in terms of count of farmers and agriculture laborers. We see it has been gradually increasing. Number of farmers were earlier more. Now the labor force is getting more and more, which means within agricultural workforce, if we try to see, there are going to be there are less number of farmers and more number of agricultural laborers. This is expected because sometimes we see farming is less profitable. Risk is very high. But when we try to see in a sort of different perspective, like in terms of the share, how the share is changing in terms of total workforce in the country, or within agriculture, how the share of farmers are declining, we get a different picture. The share of farmers within agriculture is declining very fast. We see at the right panel, shown by the blue line. So when it comes to the total agricultural workforce, it is still declining, but the rate of declining less when comparing with the farmers who are moving from here. And this national level picture is not just about the All India observation. These estimates are derived using the NSS unit level data for all different districts to the mentioned period. In 2010, 2020, 11, 12, for two reference period, the district level estimates have been generated and the changes has been studied. But what the map at the left is saying how far in which districts, what is happening in terms of agricultural workforce with respect to the total workforce. In the middle map, we see what is happening in the share of farmers within the agricultural workforce. In the right side, what we see is what is happening to the rural non-farm sector. At the red color in the first two map indicates there are higher number of withdrawals, like a decline. So whenever there is a red patch, we say the farmers or the agricultural workforce, they are dropping very faster. So comparing with the first and second graph, with the third graph, what do we see is in one way in eastern part and in the southern part, both farmers or both the agricultural laborers, their share is declining, which means from agriculture, they are going to some other industries. At the last map, what do we see is in the central India, there has been a lot of gap, which means this non-farm employment means other than agriculture, whatever the jobs the farmers or the agricultural workforce are entering, they are created only in few pockets. We see in southern tract, it's okay. Then in northern and in eastern tract, there are in some places where the farmers can move freely. In rest of the places in central India, the non-farm employment is also less in rural India. At the same time, there has been a lot of unemployment related issues. When we try to see why this is happening, there are two major causes at the national level. One, we can say the more and more intake of workers into the construction sector. The red line in both the graphs says the gap between productivity and wages in agriculture. Means how far a farmer is productive in agriculture with respect to what he is paid in terms of wage. Second is the share of construction sector. So over time, what do we see is these people are more and more engaged in construction related activities, and that is creating a demand in the agricultural sector for the laborers. The demand is pushing wages in agriculture, but higher wages is not getting transmitted into the productivity. The implication is a sort of, implications are very high. So when there is a demand for labor in agriculture, the wage is very high, still labor productivity is less. The farmer is supposed to pay more wages to a labor, and in return, he is getting less and less. And this results in an increasing cost for the farmer so that his net income or his net profit is getting down on one side. And this is a sort of artificial inflation of wages in agriculture. So this has to do with inequality within rural area. Many a times we see the net income of a farmer is less than the net income of the wage labor, even wage labor who is working in agriculture. In the latest NSS survey, if you try to see unit level data, we will see a lot of observations. So when comparing with the farmer, if a laborer who is having no land, who is not self-employed, if he is earning more, the consequences in terms of inequality or the poverty, that is going to be very high. So the other part is the MNREGA. there are a lot of evidences to show after the floating of MNREGA, sort of demand for agriculture labor has been increased, but the availability has been less. But other interesting fact is like whatever has been the drop in the agricultural workforce after this 2005 or 6, that is roughly equivalent to the people who are entering into the MNREGA workforce. Some sort of takeaways like that, even if we can't able to straightly say like all people who are out of agriculture are engaged in MNREGA related activities, the comparison between the drop in the numerical estimates are signaling like the possibility is very high. So people, they are preferring less and less agriculture, either to be a farmer or to be an agricultural laborer. And they are trying to get better gain from these sort of activities like public employment guarantee programs. So the change in this labor workforce or the output, we call together as a transformation. Using mostly these two indicators are used in most cases to understand what is transformation. So what is its impact on national growth? That can be estimated some sort of decomposition procedure, or you can go for any regression sort of things. Here we did for a different period, starting from 1980s to 11-12, because after that this employment survey was discontinued. Now the PLFS is available, but it's not straightly comparable. So these are like exercises are using this the employment and unemployment data related to 1982-83 to 2011-12. So the idea here is to see how far this labor shift process on one side and the increasing productivity within agriculture, within manufacturing, within services, how far they are contributing to the overall national growth. So from 80s to so far, what we observe is in most of the time, we might have seen this term like jobless growth, like we are growing in terms of GDP, but we are not creating any employment. We can try to correlate even now at present, the GDP has recovered after the COVID, but unemployment issue remains same. And the second takeaway is like productivity is a major source of growth. Even though people move from one place to the other, it impacts the productivity, or sometimes it improves the productivity. Major sources productivity is generated within the sector that mostly arises from the technology. So it indicates a sort of demand to invest continuously in technology, so that even if there is going to be a lot of transfer from labor from agriculture to some other industries, the technology will be keep yielding so that we can sustain the growth. Third takeaway is like, even if we see sort of people moving from one sector to the other, in general, we perceive in negative sense, like people are moving from agriculture. So this is creating a sort of negative impression, but its contribution when we try to see for the overall national productivity growth, that has been positive. So in the transfer from one sector to the other is in general in development literature is a symptom of advancement or improvement. So when we try to see why it is happening, we try to go for estimating how different factors are contributing. We can classify the different phenomena into three sections. One is terms of trade, which means prices, either in absolute terms or in relative terms. So how far the prices in agriculture is performing, or otherwise how far the prices in agriculture are doing with respect to the changes in prices of the non-agriculture sector. And the second part is how far the technology is different in agriculture with respect to the non-agriculture. And the third is the levels of investment made in agriculture with respect to non-agriculture. These three factors in most cases explain why the share of GDP or the share of employment in agriculture is declining over time. So here what we did is from 1981 to 2016, we collected different information related to this variable, and we try to estimate the relative influence of these factors. The variables at the lower panel, they are the variables that are explaining the relative decline. We see terms of trade has a negative relation noted by minus 0.476. That has the highest influence. and then the R&D expenditure differences, capital labor ratio differences, and we add some additional variables to explain the differences between wage and productivity. And everything has a greater influence on explaining structural change in agriculture. And from this information, what we can infer is, like, even in future, if we are going to add more capital in agriculture, and if the capital investment is higher in non-agriculture and comparing with the agriculture, the fate of or the position of declining workforce, either the farmers or the agricultural laborers, it is going to continue. One. And the second part is, like, terms of trade here is negative, which means even in agriculture, if prices are improving with respect to the non-agriculture, the declining workforce or declining GDP will continue. So these all are about a national level picture when we compare agriculture with respect to manufacturing or service sector and related variables. And within agriculture, we can explain the phases are gradually changing from one period to the other. So here in growth, if we try to focus from the mid 50s to 11, 12, we can update till 2021. The position will remain same at the final phase. The GDP or the GVA generation process, that itself has not been very smooth. Like, we can't say the rate of growth in agriculture is sort of 3% or 4% in a blank way. So in each phases, the performance has been very different. So accordingly, the growth has also been changed. So in mid 60s, we all know well, we have been introduced with the green revolution technology following the drought at 2 years, and it took around 2 decades just to get spread in different states. Like in northwest states, it was introduced first, then it gradually spread to the other states. And first it was in wheat, then from wheat it came into rice, then fertilizer use gradually shifted from wheat and rice to maize, and then other cash crops like sugarcane. So there are different time periods where development took place. In 70s and 80s, this is a sort of adoption and dissemination period we can classify. But then in 90s, the country was introduced to the LPG policies, and many a times we can find discussion relating to these periods, like these liberalization policies have focused less on agriculture and more on other sectors, mostly on services. So following that, there has been a decline in growth in agriculture, investment in agriculture. Terms of trade was also, the prices were also not well for about 2 decades. So there has been a stagnancy from 1990s to mid 2000s. Then after that, then the recovery improved in terms of investment and prices. And then the growth started accelerating from 2004-5 to 11-12. The rate of growth or the recovery has been very faster. So the agriculture, even in terms of growth, has undergone a lot of transformation. And this transformation in other way can be perceived in sectoral dimensions. Say we can take a crop sector, what has happened, and in livestock sector, what has happened, in fisheries, what has happened. In crop sector, what do we see, what do we observe is, many a times the rate of increase in yield growth has continued, but the rate of acceleration has been less. So here we can see this line is not straight anyway in many crops. In wheat, after 2002, the rate of increase in yield has slowed down. In maize, this has picked up, but like that we can keep on correlating. In core cereals, we picked up. In pulses, gradually it has picked up. But when we try to compare the crop sector performance as a whole with respect to the fruits or vegetables or the livestock sector, that is very different. So in latest year, at least in last 10 years, we see the performance of crop sector has been around 1% or less than 1%, not more than that. In livestock and fisheries, the rate of growth has been very high. From the supply side, we have to perceive, not from the demand side. From the demand side, the demand has been still more. So what we see from here is the entire economy in agriculture has shifted from focusing more on crops to the other commodities, but when measured in terms of value terms. But there are, if you try to count number of farmers who are still engaged in producing crops, the number will be very high. But the focus as a whole has shifted from crops to other dimensions. And even within crops, we see we are producing more fruits and vegetables instead of other commodities. And within food grains, we focus more on pulses when comparing with paddy and wheat. So the response system within agriculture has transitioned to a different level. And this is a sort of comparison of change in share of agriculture and crop sector and livestock sector GVA over time. So here at a national level, in the final panel, you can see what has happened in the national level picture. We see the share of crop sector has gradually declined and rapidly declining in latest years. And this pattern again is not uniform across the states. We see in Andhra there is a sort of gradual decline. In Jammu Kashmir, the decline was gradual, then stagnant, then it is rapid. So in Tamil Nadu, this is a sort of flat for some time, and it is declining very faster. So the pattern has been very different across the state, except in some states. In some states, we see stagnancy. In Himachal or West Bengal, or this Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh added together. But overall, we can see in most of the states, they are focusing less on crops and more on livestock related activities. And this is in terms of growth. So in 20 states, we see only in 4 states, the rate of growth of livestock sector is roughly equal to the growth in crop sector, which are shown in the red mark. In all states, whichever are in blue, there the growth rate of the livestock sector output is very high than the crop sector output. And the states which are in circle, OD is for Odisha, then Andhra Pradesh plus Telangana, Bihar and Jharkhand, and Gujarat. In these states, the growth of livestock sector is very high when comparing with the rate of growth sector. So whenever any focus has to be given on promoting sort of inclusive output growth or inclusive income growth, the one way to prioritize state is based on this. You see in which states, which sector is performing very fast, then invest there. That will be a strategy. This process, like an increasing focus on livestock sector when comparing with the crop sector, that has helped across the state to minimize the inequality in productivity. By productivity, we can approach the productivity aspect into 2 dimensions. One is land productivity, other is labor productivity. Like you divide the GDP by the net sown area or grass crop area, we'll get the how far the agriculture value is produced in a given unit of land, and we can count per farmer or per agricultural laborer what is the value of output. And then we try to see compare each state some 2 decades or 3 decades before, and you compare their present status, then we will get to know whichever states who were having very lower level of productivity and sometime whether they are doing well now or they are doing little less. So one idea here, what do we get is if there is a sort of negative relation, means even in left panel and right panel, we can see at 2005-6, whatever the productivity levels were in the states, in some states, their growth has been very high. Like we can see Madhya Pradesh or Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, Odisha, there the productivity growth is very high. And Kerala, West Bengal, Punjab, their growth is very less. So here the overall process says people are the states which were having a lower level of productivity level. They are performing relatively better when comparing with the states that are having very high productivity. So from the point of view of the productivity, there has been a general shift from livestock sector and the process has been inclusive. And there are some apprehensions like if the productivity is very high, it will not necessarily mean income has also been very high. In sometimes there is possible, like even if we are having very high productivity level, the market may not be observing. So that may not be getting transferred into an increase in net income. So the idea here was here in the horizontal axis, each number refers a district. So around 500 districts were chosen, and the average crop income or livestock income were estimated using the unit level data, and they have been plotted. The area under the area with the blue shadow is the average district level income from crops, and the other one is from livestock. So in comparing with 3 and 13, we see in a lot of districts, the income from livestock has increased very much. So even at the aggregate, at an aggregate, what do we see is in 2003, the share of crop was around 90%, and now this is reduced to 80, and livestock share is roughly double. And still, there are a lot of states or districts where crop income growth is very high, like for instance, in Rajasthan and Haryana, uh, and in Andhra and Karnataka, it's been between 5 to 10% when it comes to crop. But a general shift from the crops towards livestock income in terms of income, not an output. This is very clear. And if we try to have a regional dimension, what do we see is like earlier, the average income of the districts were high in the northern region. And then it was south and then west and then east in 2003. Then after a decade, when we try to compare, the north has become, this has been pushed in the second position and west has been the first choice. The reason was like we'll see in the next slide. In the western region, both crop sector income and livestock sector income, they have grown very well. But in terms of north, in some states performance has been good, but in some states that was not up to that much. So this north has become the second position. The other takeaway is like in the eastern India, even 2003 or 2013, the rate of growth is less and income is also less. But when we try to compare itself with its earlier level, like in 2003, what it was earning and how it is earning, what is the growth rate? In general, in Eastern India, this is better. And we can see this from the district level income map. These estimates were derived from the unit level data, again using the situation assessment survey. Here, what do we see in 2003 is in eastern part, the income levels were relatively less when comparing with the other districts in 2003. In 13, there has been a slight difference. There has been some sort of improvement in the eastern region. And within the western region, we see a new cluster. Earlier, the income levels were less and they now are started earning more. So this transition, when converted into the growth terms, we see a lot of changes. In between 2003 and 2013 in the eastern region, including some parts of this Andhra Pradesh or the eastern states, the growth in net income has been very high. But again, as we saw in case of the rural non-farm employment in the central Indian region, still the income growth is less. So we can say both in terms of output or income, there has been a shift from, there has been a change towards responding to the market where prices are very high. When it comes to the trade, again, we see agriculture is doing very good. The share of export has never been below the share of imports. So that itself is one key point. And here in absolute terms, when we try to see export values has always been high. So, and here now a lot of emphasis has been given to promote the agricultural exports. So we can say export contribution has been high. It is increasing. In future, it is going to increase as well. At the same time, imports are also very high. When we try to see different commodities which are giving us more money at the foreign market, we try to classify in two dimensions, which are experiencing higher growth and providing high value. And the other one is in terms of value, we are earning high, but in recent decades, the growth has been falling down. So the marine products, basmati rice, spices, and sugar, their growth has been somewhat appreciable during the between this 15 and 20. And there are like buffalo meat or the non-basmati rice or cotton, the rate of growth has been slightly less. So whenever the strategy or some interventions has to be made in the export market, especially when we try to link export with the farmers' income, we can able to give focus on those commodities which will have a better prospects in the foreign market. And for these changes, be it in terms of GDP or employment or the other factors or income, the factors are very few when it comes to agriculture. And a more important factor is the investment. So we know in different sector in GVA how much different segments are contributing. At the same time, if we try to see or correlate the level of output with respect to investment, we can see in crop sector, a lot of investment has been made, but its contribution in terms of output is less. For instance, in the table, we can see within the total investment in agriculture, more than 80% is made on crop sector. But when we see in terms of GVA, crop is contributing only 56%. In livestock, we are investing only around 11%, but it is contributing around 29%. It was in 2018-19, even in 21 or 22, the status is going to remain same. So if we could able to invest more in livestock, the returns will be very high. And as we saw earlier, the rate of growth itself is very high. And the growth is not subject to this volatility as in the crop sector. So that is one way of sustaining growth in the future. Similar is the case of the fisheries. And for increasing investment, the major source is credit. Even we can see the total investment is not entirely coming from the government. In fact, roughly 20% comes from the government sector, rest 80% comes from the farmers. So whenever there is going to be a change in credit policy, that is going to directly influence how much the farmers invest in agriculture. This is the trend in the last 10 years. The private sector investment is high, but it is volatile. This is seasonal. We can see this is following a sort of seasonality. The public sector investment is less, roughly 20%, but it is gradually increasing. So only when they add together, when the volume goes beyond some point, their multiplier effects are high. In budget statement, now we hear the effect of multiplier many a times. When the questions were asked about how the employment is going to be generated, the general answer was like the capex was improved very much, and the higher investment is going to create more employment through multiplier effects. So these multiplier effects acts well in agriculture also. Mostly the effect of multiplier is high for the farmers investment. It's about 8 times when compared with the public sector, whose multiplier is roughly 5 times. But all the investment what farmers are making are not their own money. Much of it comes from the formal credit sector. So banks are paying more, farmers are getting credit from the banks, sometimes from the non-farm sources, and they are investing in agriculture. But the pattern of credit delivery within agriculture itself is very different. When we try to see different segments like short-term credit means like a crop loan or a KCC, we can say. The medium-term and long-term credit are different. So when we try to see this composition itself, how the formal credit structure lending is changing, for short-term credit, emphasis is very high. In terms of value, lot of loans has been given for meeting this short-term crop purposes. But when it comes to medium-term or long-term, the coverage is very high. Number of accounts are very high, growing very high. But when we try to see how much it is allotted, that is falling. So when we try to expect the agriculture growth has to sustain, or it is expected to produce more output, investment has to be from the medium and long-term credit. So if the banks are able to give more credit under the long-term or medium-term credit when comparing with the short-term credit, the returns in long terms will be more sustainable. That is one issue. And the second point is like, even if we are seeing the credit amount has increased very much over times, there are a lot of disparities. One, we still see commercial banks are having a major share when it comes to credit, but there are at least 25% of the credit comes from the money lenders. That has to be its consequences are different when farmers in the formal credit sector. The structure is very different when comparing if the farmer is getting credit from the other sources. But when it comes to inequality within the states, in some southern states we see number of people who are getting credit and how the value what they are getting. These two are very high. In some states, these two are very low. So the credit policies, whenever they want to increase focus either in expanding crop loans or expanding investment, based on the returns what we saw are in terms of convergence, these states can be preferred and focused. So these are all entirely related to agriculture. And within rural regions, The other notable phenomenon is increase in non-farm employment, like other than agriculture, in manufacturing, in construction, in trade sector, employment is improving within the rural regions. What is happening is some farmers are diversifying their activities. Like if a farmer was entirely dedicated to agriculture earlier, now he is diversifying. Maybe he's becoming a part-time farmer and is giving more time for other activities. And this sometimes helps to invest more in agriculture. Like in one season I work for agriculture, in the other season I'm going for the other sector, and some money invest back in agriculture. That is one phenomenon. Otherwise, like you just for like just we have some land and we have the scope for doing agriculture. I do also agriculture, but my major focus is on other sector. And this sort of experience has been in all states. At least since 93, if we see, in none of the state there has been a decline in non-farm employment within the rural region. In all states, there has been an expansion. The expansion has been very high in like Haryana, West Bengal, Jammu Kashmir, and Tamil Nadu. And comparing with this earlier level, the share of people who are employed in other sources has increased very much. So when okay, so when we try to see the consequences of change in structure in employment or output or wages or investment pattern, so we see everything is linked to the one another, and the consequences is very different. So here, what do we try is we try to model different causalities, and we try to see how far it is helping to increase productivity in agriculture, speed up the structural change process, the wage adjustment process, and all these phenomena, how they are influencing rural poverty level. So here, every line here is an equation. Like rural poverty is a function of productivity, agricultural wages, and non-farm employment. And agri-productivity is a function of labor intensity, public investment, credit, irrigation, so on. So we can expect at least 4 different equations, and they were solved using the 3-stage least square method, a multiple equation procedure. And what do we see here is how different factors are helping to increase productivity or reduce poverty or expedite structural change process. So when we see productivity within agriculture, the return to investment is very high. So if the government is investing 1,000 rupees per hectare more than what is investing now, the productivity per hectare will be 6 times more than what it is now. So the investment has a lot of effects. But still, as we observed earlier, the share of public investment is less. In this model, we didn't add the private investment, but we have already added in the other model. The return to private investment is more than 8 times when comparing with the 6 times for the public investment. And this productivity increase. So if the productivity is increasing by 1,000 rupees per hectare, in rural poverty, there's going to be a decline by 0.14%. The 0.14 seems to be very less, but when if we try to see in absolute number, its impact is very high. So agricultural productivity has a huge impact on reducing rural poverty levels. Likewise, we can see the impact of different parameters. Wage as well has a good influence on reducing poverty, and the wages in non-farm sector has an influence on wages in agriculture. These two are interrelated. So leaving aside some changes at present in the recent time, what it is happening and how the future is going to respond to the present structure can be classified under some dimensions. One is the demand structure. We saw a lot of emphasis has been given in terms of productivity or production on livestock sector based commodities. But when we try to see the demand is still very high. If we try to classify different commodity, people are expending the most for milk than the cereals and pulses added together. So the demand for milk and eggs are very high than this entire cereal itself. Like that, we can see the demand for fruits and vegetables. If we try to compute the share for same commodities in terms of GVA, that is very different. So the demand is very high for some commodities, but the production is less. Somewhere the demand is less, but we are producing more and more. That is one structure. So in future, the more demand is going to be only in those commodities. The first four you can see 21, 20, 13 and 10 are the other one. They are going to make the entire demand structure. So in future, when it comes to developing a profit-oriented agriculture, focus has to be mostly on these sort of commodities. Second, the risk in agriculture remains same, and even in future, the risk may continue. So this is the rainfall structure in different seasons from 1900 to so far. We didn't see a single period where there has not been any fluctuation. Even in future, the fluctuation is going to remain same, and this fluctuation is going to directly transmitted into the change in crop yield, and this yield is going to affect the agriculture GDP. But since the livestock sector or the fisheries, they are doing very good, they are masking the effect at the aggregate level. But when we try to see what is happening to the farmer or what is happening to the consumer, the structure is going to be different. If the volatility is going to be more in the market, and it's going to get transmitted to the consumer as well. So these sort of risk may continue in future. And when we try to see the impact of climate change, and if we try to add their impact as well, there is going to be a lot of change in future. And the third, the change in prices not just is going to be an aggregate level, but in high value commodities, the price fluctuation is going to be also high. So here for onion retail prices, that has been flattered. So here what do we say is in each year, the changes in prices or the fluctuations in prices are adding up. So in future, if there's going to be a risk, if there is not going to be adequate investment in the post-harvest infrastructure or storage, this inflation, the differences is going to cause a lot of ambiguity. And sometimes we also see like we are producing a lot of sugar, we want to export, but at the same time we see international market prices are lower than in the domestic market. So there are some restrictions in the market as well, like if there are demand and if we are going to produce accordingly, then the farmers can benefit more than happening in the other way. And in sometimes the discussion is more oriented towards protectionism. Like protectionism is rising in India. Like it is its entire motive is on protecting the domestic farmers or domestic industries in that way. But that seems to be a necessary phenomenon in many cases. Like in edible oil, we keep on importing a lot of edible oil. Like the foreign exchange, what we are losing is also very high. At the same time, there are interventions to boost it in the domestic market, but it's not happening as fast. So these inward-looking sort of policies, at least they become necessary at the present level. But what do we see is the response within the domestic market is not that much. We see in case of oil seeds, there are a lot of fluctuations, and the production is also fluctuating. And when comparing with the demand, what do we produce is very less. So this is going to, in future, the uncertainty remains as such. But the policies from the government side were since 1980s to so far, when we try to match what do we import and what do we produce and what do we process, there has been a huge imbalance. In recent times, there has been some increase in procurement, but what do we procure and what do we process within the domestic market is very meager share when comparing with the import what we are doing. So if the strategy, production strategy or the policy support strategy, if that is going to respond more to the domestic demand, then when we try to see the farmers' income or inequality related concerns, they can be addressed effectively. Even this is one signal, like we are trying to favor the domestic producing sector in terms of tariff hikes. In the last few years, we see the tariff has increased in comparing with the earlier level. The domestic market is gradually responding, but in case of some commodities like sunflower or soybean, there is no big response. Even if we are increasing the tariff level, in case if tariff level is increasing, it's expected like farmers will be producing more so that they will be getting better prices. In some commodities, it has happening, and in some commodities, it's not happening. And there are some other dimensions where the economy is focused and agriculture is expected to respond. So one is the $5 trillion economy, and agriculture is expected to contribute one third when the India is reaching 5 trillion. So one small exercise was like in which rates investment and export in agriculture has to grow so that the dream can be achieved. We did some sort of exercises, preliminary exercises for it. So what do we find is in agricultural, within the agriculture, if the investment, both public and private sector added together, if growing by 8% a year and export is growing by 10% a year, given that the given prescribed rates of growth in other sector, there is a possibility like reaching the 5 trillion levels. And after reaching that level, how different the farmer's income is going to be when comparing with the other households, either rural or urban, the picture is given. But what do we see from the here is, or the takeaway we can say is like it needs a lot of efforts to promote export and domestic investment. The public sector can invest, but when it comes to the farmers, their level of investment is declining in recent years, or at least stagnant, we can say. So if we try to expect in each year 8% the investment has to grow, that is going to demand a lot of efforts. And the other part is like we need to expand more on the freebie sort of things. Like if we are going to universal income transfer is the other concept which is evolving in agriculture now. Under PM Kisan, some subsidy has been given. There is no foolproof study like sort of saying that entire money what is given for farmers are invested in agriculture. But in different scenarios, it is possible to estimate, like if we are trying to give 6,000 rupees in a year, even if we are giving same for different farmers, its multiplier effect is different because of the change in consumption and investment patterns in the other economy. So that this was a small exercise, and what do we see is like in the box under the caps and results we have discussed. What do we see is like direct income can be met out in multiple means. Either we can cut expenses in some other occupations and we try to invest in somewhere, or straight away we can buy from some external agencies and we can extend this position. But in general, whatever we do, the benefit to the marginal and small farmer is going to be high when comparing with the other section of the economy. And it may not be a big burden to the government if we try to see a marginal increase, because 6,000 rupees, and within 6,000 rupees, 10% if we are going to increase. So when it comes to a fiscal position, if we try to adjust or borrow money from the other sector, like if we try to cut back some expenditure in other sector and we are trying to increase the sort of lending, this may promote growth and promote equity as well. So these are some studies which is to say the synergy between research and policy system has been increasing over the years, because sometimes we see people saying research procedure or research system where the activities are framed are different from what the policy system is demanding. We do some machine learning based models, and what do we found is there is a sort of synergy, like response to each other. Like what is interested in the policy system, the research system is also doing, and whatever the research system is producing, the policy space is using those information, those sort of synergy. But the linkage was slightly weak. That's what was my observation, our observation. So in future, when it comes to transformation or growth, there are some dimensions which may be a major focus, and they are listed here. One, we know government has to invest more. There's no change in that. But when we try to do those things, the commodity specificity is going to be the question. We know what has happened to the farm sector reforms now. Some commodities are focused more. Now pulses and oilseeds are gradually, their procurement levels are rising, but there is equally an opportunity like farmers growing other crops may also demand, because in MSP there are so many crops are covered. When comparing with the procurement, the coverage is very high. So the commodity specificity and their multiplier effect for investment, that may be one issue in future. And the second is like if we compose or they compare the private investment procedure the returns what a small farmer is getting is adequate when comparing with the return what a large farmer is getting, because that is going to be again a sort of focus in future, because already we see whoever going out of agriculture or going whoever is diversifying agriculture with non-farm sources, they are all small farmers. So people who are having small lands, they are doing less agriculture, earning more from the non-agriculture. How the equity effect is going to be there in future, that is going to be the other question. And when we try to promote this sort of income transfer, either in PM Kisan or in other mode, however that is going to be invested only in agriculture, or if it's going to be used for other purposes, what is going to happen for the productivity within agriculture? That may be one other issue. Interest and demand, like we mentioned earlier, the response by the agricultural production system to the trade is whether it is going to be adequate or not. The edible oil is just one example for it. We can try to see those sort of responses in other commodities as well. So when we try to say double the agriculture export, or if we try to observe spillover effects of agriculture to the farming community, this product for portfolio, that will also be a major issue in coming days. And in recent years, there has been a focus on FPOs, or these drones, as we discussed earlier. The push has been increasing, but how far they take away by the farmers, that will decide the reform process. Like in recent few days before, we saw the government has banned the import of this drone. I mean, if you try to import drone from abroad, there's going to be some restriction, but we can import its spare parts and we can try to organize within the domestic market and use it. And this sort of support has been, lot of support has been given by the government side. But how far the farmer is going to adopt that quickly, those sort of technology, that is going to decide this reform process. And these are all what I wanted to share with you. Thank you. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to share. So maybe if someone are interested to speak on this issue, something we can proceed.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, these coordinators can manage these things now. दिलीप जी, मैडम है क्या?
एक मिनट सर, चेक करता हूँ.
Sir, can I ask something? Sir?
By virtue of the
No, voice is sort of breaking.
the director and vice.
Yeah, very good, sir. Thank you, sir, for delivering a very a good and very knowledgeable lecture on the agriculture transformation, sir. Sir, you have so what was how the agriculture transformation it has taken place and how it is being taken place in the agriculture sector.
Yes.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah.
Sir, just one thought come, like if you look, as you also mentioned from the policy perspective, that the recent budget for the year 2022 and 23, sir, if you look into that, sir, so we can find in that particular that the statement that we are going to cut down the import of the oil seed. Major, you mentioned in your presentation that approximately nearly 53%, that we used to import from the, let's say, Indonesia, and from the Malaysia 30%. So, and on the one side, the government is giving promotion for the domestic production of the oil seeds, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so looking these two parameters, that is the boosting our domestic consumption and to give some restriction on ban on the oil seed. So in that particular case, from my if I look to that particular statement or the so there is no any kind of the guarantee that or assurance that is been given to the farmers that the procurement will be done by the government, because if you see on the converse opposite side, in case of the wheat and the rice, they have that we are going to be as a procurement major procurer for the wheat and the, let's say, the your rice, nearly approximately to the 164 lakh people or the farmers. So that such kind of the assurance we are not going to find in case of the, let's say, oil seed. And until and unless if there is no any assurance or the guarantee to the farmer, the how means from the policy side, the domestic production, it is going to be takes place in our India, sir. So this is my just thought. I would like to have your opinion, sir. That sir. Thank you, sir.
No, that is the dimension is very right. But what has happened, like from the 1965 or so on, when the FCI was created and the other infrastructure was created, the idea was to procure more food because by that time we don't have adequate rice and wheat. That system somehow it is still continuing. Even many a times we see the amount of procurement is very higher than the norms. But when it comes to oil seed, like for in case of paddy and wheat, when the government buys it, there is a standard mechanism to dispose also in public distribution system or under the NFSM Act. There are some mandates, and for pensioners, there are a lot of schemes where the government can dispose the rice and wheat what it is producing. But when it comes to oil seeds, it's not as such. Mostly, whatever the oil seeds are produced are processed by the private industries. So, if the government is some sort of engagement like we will procure, then there need be some strategies where the government where they can dispose. So, when it comes to meeting with the processing sector, that will be a very huge task for the government itself. Even many a times we will see the government want to reduce the sort of procurement, but there are some issues beyond our consideration. In terms of oil seeds for the government, it's not be that easy to procure and dispose. And legally, if you try to say even the MSP also, it's not sort of assurance. We can't find like the government is assured of procuring these sort of quantities, but by sort of tradition it keeps doing. In oil seeds, there is no such guarantee, but guarantee cannot also be given because there is, I feel, the disposal mechanism is much weaker when comparing with the cereals and pulses.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome here.
So, any other questions? So, I was actually out for.
Yes, ma'am.
So, these Q&A questions are answered, Dr. Balaji? In Q&A, there are 3 questions.
Yes, ma'am. I can go through. There are 3 questions.
Yeah.
can you please let us know how did you retrieve the sector-wise growth rate? No, the sector-wise growth rate is not from NSSO. From the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, we can find. At the national level, there are press releases. At the state level, for each state, for different commodities, the value of output is given. That is, we don't need to make any payment for downloading it. That is easily accessible. NSSO is only for the employment related or the income related estimates, like district level farmers income, district level employment, district level number of farmers. For that, we depend on NSSO. There are some codes for each occupation. For self-employed people within the rural region who are in agriculture, there are some national industrial classification codes. Based on that, we can extract. The second question was, what are the pros and cons of natural farming promotion policy? When it comes to natural farming policy, there are also some ideological differences. Like some people say it's not possible, and some people say it is possible, but possible only in the long run. In the short run, it's not possible. But when it comes to the promotion policy, what do we feel is like the base for promoting natural farming has to be once compared in terms of numerical estimates. Like we know how much fertilizer we are using, and we try to see to replace those sort of fertilizer, what is the level of the manures are required, or to produce this manure sustainably, how much what should be the different livestock size, whether the existing livestock population can sustainably give it for. And if you try to see if we want to sustain those sort of manure, to sustain the number of livestock, whether we have adequate cost mechanism, those things has to be seen. And unless it has been seen in terms of numerical measures, it is very difficult to say. And the last question is related to recently public investment is increasing. What is the share of states and central government in public investment? What is the impact on growth in agriculture sector? Like we mentioned earlier, in public investment, two components. Much of it comes from the farmers. 20%, 22%, it is coming from the government. Share of states is like we are perceiving here, this is coming from the farmers perspective. If you try to see the private investment, different share of state and central means we can't straight away count it, because farmer is investing, farmer anyway, they have to be classified in state. So when we try to see private investment, mostly it come only from states, private investment. When it comes to public investment, again, we see the total aggregate as an aggregate of states, because even if the center is investing, it is giving to states, and from the state it is flowing for different investment purposes. So mostly we can't classify assets as a central government share and state government share in public investment. Or if we wanted to see, there are finance documents in the RBI, we can sit and try to see. Thank you. Okay, there is also one more question in the chat box saying an increase in productivity by 1,000 rupee will reduce the poverty by 0.14%. Can you explain? This was the coefficients we got from running a simultaneous equation model. One equation was related to poverty, other equation was related to productivity, and the third, like we explained in the flow chart. Here the idea was like the 1,000 rupee is per hectare basis. So now how much we are investing, we need to see in each hectare what is the level of investment. So if suppose per hectare on an average at the national level, if the productivity productivity in agriculture is around 50,000 per hectare in terms of value. So if the 50 becomes 51,000, then the rate of poverty, maybe after 11-12, there is no poverty estimates. In 11-12, the rural poverty was around 25%, I think. So the 25 will become 24.86. That is the accurate interpretation. And if you are still interested, then you can forward your mail. I can give the details.
Dr. Balaji, you can switch on your video.
Yes, no problem. Okay.
Yeah. So,
one more was like, what's your opinion about repeat farm laws? It's not related to the presentation. Can you share your opinion? Personal opinion is like the intention was genuine. When it comes to the farmers' protest, whoever were protesting, their intention was also genuine. But when we try to see at a macro picture, you don't focus on any state, but just see a farmer as a farmer, then the reforms are supposed to give or perform better. Or if there's going to be a regional dimension, the interpretation will be different.
And you can get so many views in media and others.
Yes.
No one can give. So, any other question? So, I think there is no other question. Okay. I would like to thank you, Dr. Balaji, for such nice presentation. Like besides the issues which you have covered, I think there is one more message to be learned by everyone. That is good slides. You have really made wonderful slides. I think all would have appreciated that. It looks as if you should take one more session on how to make such good slides. How do you organize? So it is really wonderful. So thank you once again for very nice and very informative lecture. One more question has now come up. Can SAM be adopted for behavioral study?
Yeah, this structural SEM, structural equation model, even in behavior study, it is applicable. The original SEM in many literature comes from the business economics. When it comes to the behavioral part, most of the response is sort of qualitative character. Like here we study investment, wages, productivity. But when it comes to the behavioral study, this is like whether a farmer is feeling whether particular technology is good or not, or how far he is willing to adopt the technology, or if he is able to adopt the technology, whether he is going to continue it or not. Those sort of dimensions are taken in behavior study, but this SCM has been applied in all the context. Now in behavior study, earlier it was in general economics and business, and yeah, yes, it has already been applied.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Like we would have chance to listen to Dr. Balaji in another very important session in probably next week. So you can enjoy that session also. That is going to be very useful session. Thank you once again, Dr. Balaji. Thanks a lot. And now this is end of this pre-lunch session, and we shall meet again at 2:30 with another very important and informative lecture on value chain analysis with some flavor of practical aspects of analyzing that. So thanks, lots of appreciation for you.
Okay.
I shared your email, people were asking your email ID.
Yeah, yes, ma'am, yes, please.
I have shared it with them. I have shared all your reference material, published papers, which you have given for the participants. So,
yes.
So that has been shared with you all. So thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the participants in the organizing committee for this opportunity. This extraction procedure data, something they are easily accessible, but in case if you find difficulty, then you can mail. Thank you.
We do have a lecture on extraction by Dr. Nitya.
Yes, okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So now, before we break, anybody would like to highlight any issue? Okay, we will think of providing facility to the main panel to more participants. We will look at the attendance aspects of the previous days, and on that basis, some more participants will be allowed into this. Also, whether some participants, we would also like to know whether some participants would like to go out of this